We all live in a digital world. We all need it to be open and safe. We all want to trust.
And to be trusted.
We all despise control.
And desire freedom.
We are all united.
Welcome to the Partner2Connect Digital Coalition session on connecting people everywhere. My name's David Kirkpatrick. I'm a journalist with a group called Techonomy Media in New York and a big supporter and believer in the ITU's mission and in the work that we're discussing here today. So we're going to have a really dynamic conversation with a bunch of fantastic speakers. I'm going to quickly tell you who they will all be. So as soon as I finish speaking, you will hear from Doreen Bogdan-Martin, who is the director of the Telecommunication Development Bureau at the ITU. We'll also hear from Pamela Koch-Hamilton, who's Director General of ITC, Walid Mathlouthi, who's head of the Future Networks and Spectrum Management Division of the ITU. We'll hear from Her Excellency Ursula Owusu-Ekuful, who's Minister of Communications and Digitalization of Ghana. We'll hear from Joachim Reiter, Chief External and Corporate Affairs Officer of Vodafone Group. Then Eleanor Sarpong, Deputy Director and Policy Lead for the Alliance for the Affordable Internet at the World Wide Web Foundation. His Excellency Mohammed Sharif, Minister of State for Environment, Climate Change and Technology of the Maldives. Heidi Schroederis-Fox, Director of the UNOHRLLS, which is the small states, island states, landlocked developing states. I never get that acronym right, but it's a very important entity in the UN that she'll be talking about and how they view connectivity. Maria Francesca Spadolizano, Officer in Charge, Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Technology and Assistant Secretary General for Policy Coordination and Interagency Affairs at DESA of the UN. She'll be speaking fairly early in the program. And Michael Wilms, Partner and Director of BCG, will also be participating and give us a full picture of what's going on in terms of the data and the strategy here. So very happy that everyone's with us. Thank you for coming in from all around the world. And let me now turn it over to Doreen.
Excellent. Thank you so much, David. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to welcome you to this IGF session on connecting people everywhere. As you may know, on the sidelines of this year's General Assembly in New York, ITU launched the Partner2Connect Digital Coalition in cooperation with the Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Technology. P2C is a brand new partnership platform aimed at driving access to meaningful connectivity and digital transformation in the hardest to connect communities, including those in LDCs, LLDCs, and SIDS. And while it's still early days, I would say the response and progress to date has been impressive. We have some 187 expressions of interest to join the coalition from different stakeholders around the world. We had a successful kickoff with leaders of the coalition. We're working closely with our sister agency that, as David says, has a hard acronym to pronounce, UNOHRLLS. I'm happy to see Heidi with us today. We're working with them on a milestone event scheduled for January 24th, so save the date, during the Private Sector Forum of the 5th UN Conference on LDCs, known as LDC 5. It will take place in Doha. We also welcomed BCG as P2C's knowledge partner. I'm happy to see Michael physically present in Poland, and we've begun to draft the framework of action and the pledges that we will need to mobilize resources, partnerships, and commitments to achieve universal and meaningful connectivity. And from next week, and I'm excited about this, we will be hosting our first calls with coalition working groups to advance these different frameworks. Our P2C model is based on 4 core focus areas: connecting people everywhere, empowering communities, building digital ecosystems, and incentivizing investments. I think it's no coincidence that we picked the IGF as the ideal venue to dive deeper into the details of Focus Area 1, connecting people everywhere, because of course the headline theme of this year's IGF is Internet United. That dream of universal global citizenship, of a cohesive, inclusive online community in which every person on the planet has the chance to engage, interact, and to make their voices heard, will be so important in defining the shape of tomorrow's internet and, of course, in achieving the UN vision of the world we want. It's a powerful vision, but right now it remains a distant one. Last week, ITU released its latest facts and figures on global connectivity. We were able to announce some encouraging news in the form of unusually strong growth in internet penetration during the 2 years of the pandemic. But, and I stress but, nonetheless, we estimate that 2.9 billion people have never, ever been online. And of course, that results in a digital divide that's no longer just a technology divide. It's actually an opportunity divide. So we need to find ways, innovative ways, to get those that are still offline access to connectivity and to all the opportunities that they're missing out on that can actually help to improve their lives. That means combining strategies to drive access. And when I say access, I mean the availability and, of course, the affordability of devices and data, together with strategies to drive adoption. And here we're talking about digital skills and localized, actionable, and compelling content. The objective of today's session is to gain a better understanding of the key issues that are currently impeding universal, affordable, resilient, and trustworthy connectivity, as well as the types of pledges, actions, and commitments needed to address those barriers. And guided by our incredible partners, our distinguished speakers, we want to dive deep on infrastructure, on usage and coverage gaps, on suitable technologies and reliability of services. We also, David, want to explore the importance of innovative and inclusive policies, regulatory frameworks, and of course, approaches that promote investment in connectivity solutions to support affordable access in the hardest to connect communities. I do want to thank you all again for joining us. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. David, back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Doreen. Is Maria Francesca Spadolesano with us?
Yes.
There you are in person. So good to have you in Katowice. Maria Francesca is with the Secretary General's Office of Technology. Very pleased to hear her talk next. So take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David, and thank you for having me today. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. I will first of all start by congratulating the ITU and partners for an extremely exciting and timely initiative, the Partners2Connect, which the Office of the Tech Envoy is proud to be part of. And we see this P2C as critically important for 3 reasons. First of all, the goal of universal connectivity is at the heart of this initiative and is also the foundation of the Secretary General's vision of an open, free, and secure digital future for all, as it is enshrined in the Secretary General Roadmap for Digital Cooperation, and now also in his common agenda, which was released in September. So according to the latest figures from ITU, and Doreen mentioned that already, there are still 2.9 billion people that remain unconnected, with almost 96% of these in developing countries. And while there is a significant increase in people connecting and using online tools due to COVID, I'm also convinced that this was also due to the work and efforts of many of you around this table Indeed, in recent years, there has been a new urgency, a new momentum, and a real push, I would say, for universal, affordable connectivity from the UN system, member states, and the stakeholders alike. Second reason, despite more people being online, and that's good, we cannot be complacent, as we need to bring those still unconnected online and narrow the digital divide that exists among and within countries. P2C is an opportunity to bring about real action and concrete outcomes, building on the important work already done in implementing the Secretary General's Digital Cooperation Roadmap. And we especially value P2C focus on underserved communities and countries, the least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing countries. And moreover, as the United Nations begins its journey towards a global digital compact in September 2023, we see the work being done here as a crucial building block towards this goal, laying the foundations that can and must be done. And finally, the P2C as a coalition of governments, private sector, NGOs, youth, and other stakeholders is a glowing example of what can be achieved through multi-stakeholder cooperation and partnerships, which is at the heart of the IGF mission and community. This is thus the perfect place to recommit ourselves to this crucial goal, and I look forward to this important discussion. Please count, of course, on the full support of the Office of the Tech Envoy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maria Francesca. And now I'd like to turn the floor over to Heidi Schroederis-Fox, who is Director of the Office of the High Representative for the Least Developed Countries, Landlocked Developing Countries, and Small Island Developing States.
Thank you very much, moderator. Good morning, good afternoon to all of you distinguished participants. I'm really pleased to be able to be here with you today. And let me start by really thanking ITU for being such a great partner for our office. OHRLLS, it's a long acronym, as has been mentioned, but we are really looking after and supporting the 91 most vulnerable countries of the United Nations family in the groups of least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states. And the focus on these countries is really what is needed to move the needle on universal and affordable connectivity. We all know the scale of the problem, in particular in the 46 least developed countries. And the numbers are very staggering. While 3/4 of the people in the least developed countries are covered by a mobile broadband network, only 1/4 are using it. And we also know what is blocking the majority of population in LDCs from using the internet. That is, of course, the high price of services and devices. It's a lack of awareness of the internet and its benefits, a lack in digital skills, and also a lack of relevant local content. And for LDCs, other structural challenges, such as access to electricity, exacerbates the digital divide. And we also know that COVID-19 pandemic has shown us just how important broadband internet is for our well-being and of course for economic development. We have to find solutions so that we can shift the discussion and focus on LDCs getting closer to a level of convergence with more advanced economies. Initiatives such as Partner2Connect are crucial for getting more people online. And I'm very pleased to see that Partner2Connect Digital Coalition links very directly to the upcoming 5th United Nations Conference on the Least Developed Countries, the so-called LDC5 conference, which will take place in Doha, Qatar from 23rd to 27th of January 2022. And I'm pleased to hear that the coalition, and I quote, will foster meaningful connectivity and digital transformation in the hardest to connect communities, and to offer a platform for all stakeholders to engage and mobilize resources, partnerships, and commitments to achieve universal and meaningful connectivity. That so very well encapsulates our hopes for the LDC5 conference. LDC-specific conference like this happens only once in a decade, so it's a really important opportunity. The United Nations Secretary General and His Highness the Emir of Qatar have invited all the heads of state and government to attend. And we have so far more than 30 heads of state and government that have already confirmed their participation in person. And we expect, of course, many more to come in the coming weeks. The LDC5 conference is an opportunity for all of us to shape the next 10 years of development in the world's most vulnerable countries, and to ensure that bridging the digital divide becomes a reality, not just an aspiration. We want the conference to help establish a new partnership and networks to see through the ambitions that we have for the next 10 years. At the conference, there will be several different tracks. There will be a youth track, a parliamentary track, a track for the NGOs, and very importantly, a private sector track that will be chaired by the president of Microsoft. And this is an entry point for all of you to participate. If you have not registered yet, please do so by visiting the LDC5 conference website. And you will find there all the relevant information, including how to contact my office if you have any questions about the conference. As we look forward to the 5th UN conference on LDCs and the next decade of development, I really look forward to working together with all of you in the weeks and years ahead. Together, we can unlock digital transformation in the hardest to connect communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Heidi. The numbers are dire, the problem is real, but partnering is the way to solve it. I am so gratified to work with you all in the UN, hearing from the UN about the serious priority this issue is receiving. In the Partner2Connect Digital Coalition, there are 4 focus areas. We're here talking about the first one, connecting people everywhere. So let's look at a video that explains that in more detail.
ITU estimates that 2.9 billion people have never used the internet. This means no access to a world of knowledge, opportunities, and resources. But how can we connect the 2.9 billion people still offline? The Partner2Connect Digital Coalition, known as P2C, has been created to help to bridge the digital divide by 2030 and win the SDG race. Through its 4 focus areas, P2C provides a global platform to mobilize and announce new resources, partnerships and commitments to achieve universal and meaningful connectivity. In Focus Area 1, Connecting People Everywhere, P2C aims to achieve affordable, resilient and trustworthy connectivity for all by addressing key issues like infrastructure, coverage and usage gaps, affordability and accessibility of devices and data, technologies, and reliability of service. Through a collaborative multi-stakeholder approach, P2C aims to find answers to these issues, define specific gaps, and create an overview of the required interventions, policies, and pledges to bring 2.9 billion people meaningfully online by 2030. Are you ready to help us bring digital transformation to the hardest to connect communities? Join P2C. Be part of this global effort. Pledge for connecting people everywhere, or for any of the other focus areas of the Coalition. Visit www.itu.int/partner2connect or email us at partner2connect@itu.int.
Okay, well, Let's now hear a message from Pamela Koch-Hamilton, Executive Director of the International Trade Center.
Greetings, everyone. Now more than ever, digital technology plays a central role in our global economy. Since the beginning of the pandemic, digital technology has changed the way we live and do business, as more activity shifted online. In fact, internet traffic jumped by 48% globally during 2020 alone. But the growing importance of digital connectivity also drew attention to the growing digital divide. Many developing countries, from small island states in the Caribbean to LDCs in Africa, are struggling to catch up and join the digital marketplace. Our analysis of marketplace traffic in Africa, for instance, showed declining activity, a 5% fall between 2017 and 2020. Most notably, there was a record fall in March 2020 linked to COVID measures. Consumers in urban centers such as Nairobi or Lagos made a switch to buying online, but for many African countries with lower levels of connectivity, they were left behind in the race to adopt digital technology and enter the e-commerce space. This digital divide matters because it holds back many businesses and communities from attaining sustainable economic development. They are unable to access markets online. Local producers remain captive to the insecurity of local markets. They're subject to high costs from middlemen amid other challenges. We are at a critical juncture in time. Our global goal to connect people everywhere is not a far-fetched dream. It is an imperative. Access to digital tools can bring economic opportunity for the most vulnerable. They can have a major impact on the ways we gather information, plan, connect, and sell better. These levers of change should be available to everyone, from large international enterprises to small businesses, especially small businesses. We can make this happen by making technology cheaper, encouraging local innovation, providing accessible financing, and expanding networks. Through the Partner2Connect initiative, we can harness our expertise, resources, and energy. We are motivated to join you, our partners across the public, private sector, civil society, to make this a reality. Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to dive a little deeper. I'd like to introduce Michael Wilms, who is partner with BCG, which is the knowledge partner for the Partner2Connect Digital Coalition, and Walid Mathlouthi, who's head of the Future Networks and Spectrum Management Division of the ITU, to talk about what some of the key issues are driving change in this connecting people everywhere and some of the things we can do about it. So Michael and Walid, please take it away.
Thank you, David. And if the slides could also be shown, that would be greatly appreciated. So I think, first of all, taking a step back and looking at the 4 focus areas and how it all ties together on the next slide. The way we think about this is to make the vision of Partner2Connect a reality. We need to connect supply and demand across 3 different layers: consumer devices, infrastructure and connectivity, and the content and services. And I think the other way that's really critical to understand is that this has to be a long-term balance. In what we've seen in quite a few emerging markets is that after people are online for quite some time, they start to see the value, experience the value, ecosystems get developed, and then you get to an equilibrium which can sustain itself. Now, obviously, we need to ensure that we can get into that situation and ensure that we can get to the investments that are needed to make this fly. Now, if you then look at connecting people everywhere, which is the focus of today, the key that I believe we need to solve is how can we get supply and demand to match for both the infrastructure and connectivity and consumer devices to ensure that we can get to the universal and resilient internet that Doreen also talked about. With that, let me hand it over to Walid, who will tell a little bit about how we see the process going forward to identify the issues and in the end get to a set of pledges.
So we could go to the next slide. The 4 pillars are connecting people everywhere. And in that particular pillar, we're looking at infrastructure, we're looking at affordability. Building the second pillar would be building digital ecosystems by making meaningful content available to empower communities, as for example, empowering local farmers in rural areas by providing accurate weather information or crop optimization. And the last but not least pillar would be to attract financial investment by trying to minimizing the risk and making venture capital invest in infrastructure. So the process towards the World Telecommunication Development Conference would be initially to identify issues that would drive towards closing the digital divide. So issues could span from regulation, making spectrum available, making unlocking existing infrastructure like existing fiber that could be used for connecting these rural areas, and identifying 5 to 7 issues that will be key in addressing the connectivity challenge. Once we have these key issues identified for every pillar, then the process would go on to draw a very clear gap analysis with very actionable intervention recommendations. And those recommendations will be the baseline of like the different pledges for the coalition. So the pledges could span from financial ones, but also regulation ones. Like a pledge could be to commit to improve or to make available a certain regulation that would unlock a spectrum, for example, for better connectivity. It could be also like pure infrastructure pledges by making excess capacity available on an existing network to be addressing these challenges. And the last piece is financial pledges to help bridge these missing connectivity. Of course, once we hit the World Telecommunication Development Conference, we would like to have an updated check of the different pledges and an updated execution on the different pledges. Next slide. So if we dig deeper on the focus area to connecting everyone, first of all, there are clear challenges, pretty challenging gaps to bridge. The number one is from an infrastructure point of view, the mobile coverage gap, which is around 15 to 25% in the least developed countries and LLDCs and SIDS. So a quarter of the population in certain areas is not covered by a broadband mobile network. And for instance, like in terms of 4G connectivity, we noticed that in LDCs and landlocked developing countries, the likelihood to be covered by a 4G LTE network is twice less likely than the average of the global level. The other piece of challenge is the usage or the content challenge. So the usage gap, it's 6 times larger than the coverage gap. Even though people are connected to a broadband network, they're not able to use it in a proper way to make it beneficial to their community. So 3.4 billion people have coverage but do not use the internet because of the knowledge and the skills gap. In addition, there's the urban-rural divide, which is urban dwellers are on a global level twice as likely to use the internet as opposed to the rural population. In landlocked countries, that ratio is 4, so 63% to 18% of urban dwellers compared to the rural population. The last piece is about affordability and financial investment in the network. So we are still very far from the target of 2% of affordability of the cost of the broadband connectivity. And that's partly also because of the cost of building the fiber to connect these metros and these cities in the LDCs and LLDCs. So the last challenge would be to incentivize investments for a better backbone fiber and a better like intermetro and metro ring networks. That back to you, Michael.
Thank you, Walid. If we could move to the next slide. I think what this shows is a whole set of factors that actually drive all of the observations and the numbers that Walid just presented. So let me quickly run through what we see here. Obviously, there's substantial gaps still in infrastructure. As Walid said, about 25% of the LDCs are not covered by a mobile broadband network. But on top of that, we also have energy and especially electricity availability as a key challenge, especially when we look at many of the villages. And obviously, this is caused by the underlying constraints from geography. Many of these places are hard to reach, maybe in hilly or mountainous terrain, or muson areas, etc., which just makes it more expensive to build than in quite a few other places. On a technical aspect, there's then also spectrum availability. Obviously, if we have more spectrum available, and especially low frequency spectrum, the business case to invest for the private operators becomes a whole lot better. So mobilizing the spectrum fairly quickly is then, of course, a very important aspect. And then lastly, reliability of service. As Walid said, in quite a few places, there's very little backbone and backhaul fiber, which negatively impacts the reliability of service. And the reliability of service especially becomes important when people start to depend on the internet for their livelihoods. So we also need to think about that as we think through what to do around the infrastructure. Affordability is clearly the most critical part here. And that means somehow we need to find a way to get to cheaper data plans that are in line with what people can afford. And I'm pretty sure Eleanor will talk about that in a bit. And in some places, there is still something around predatory pricing, which obviously will need to be avoided. Beyond the plans, there's then the device cost. Obviously, without a device, the internet is nothing. And clearly, a smartphone is a good starting point, but preferably you also want something of a large screen device. Now, the cost of these devices for many families is clearly too expensive today. And that's also something where we believe we would need to address. When it comes to social determinants, I think there's a whole set of factors that drive that consumers, citizens may not prioritize the internet. And that obviously affects to what extent they want to pay for internet. Obviously, food, water, etc., supersedes connectivity. But there's also, I think, a set of aspects around how can we make internet access more of a driving factor in the community and make it more important. Last but not least, there's then a whole set of underlying policy and regulation aspects that we need to consider. First of all, certainty, consistency, and simplicity in regulatory policies. I'm pretty sure Joachim will touch upon that as well. because it is a critical determinant for investors when they decide to invest in infrastructure or not. Linked to that also, of course, economic stimulus and support for investment in the hardest to reach area, and ensure that there's no high cost associated with the deployment coming out of the governments, whether it's license fee regulations, spectrum pricing, waylay fees, et cetera, which all drive up the cost. Obviously, that's a trade-off because it is also an important part of government budgets. But when we look at the impact of connectivity also on GDP and taxes, we believe it's an investment worth taking also from a government finance perspective. And lastly, ensuring that technology can also be phased out. It's an important driver of cost reduction for the overall system, and it's a driver that we need to make everything affordable. So maybe moving to the next slide, where as a starting point for discussion, we've tried to set up a number of, well, commitments, maybe we can call it potential pledges, suggested pledges, that we believe could really help drive connecting people everywhere. First of all, for private players, try to take a longer term horizon and take into account that once people get to understand and experience the internet, their willingness and ability to pay will probably go up. And we've seen that in many, many places, from Brazil to South Africa to Indonesia. Facilitating faster build from a government perspective. Really create effective USO schemes. There's much more money available than is being used in a lot of the USOs, which is just a waste. Fourthly, figure out how we can combine building ICT infrastructure and energy in a combined way. We've looked at this in the context of Giga over the summer, and we believe that there's substantial synergies when you think through how do we connect the village both to electricity and to the internet. And then clearly what we also need to ensure is that the communities are trained. Obviously, that's mainly in the other focus area, but we wanted to call out here as well. When it comes to affordability, we do see some smartphones which sort of reach below the 100 USD point, but let's try and get it below 50. Secondly, create data packages that allow people to experiment the internet and to use it for some time, maybe below cost, and really ensure that everyone in these villages can see what the benefits are, not only for entertainment, but also for getting market prices, getting weather information, and really show that it can help drive their daily lives. And then, of course, deploy cheaper technologies. On the policy regulation side, change spectrum license rules, enable communities to build their own network as well, in addition to the private players. And lastly, ensure that network sharing is allowed and maybe even pushed. David, back to you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Walid. So now we're going to really have a more conversational portion of the program. We have several eminent speakers who will react to what they've heard so far. And first, I want to invite Her Excellency Ursula Owusu-Ekuful, the Minister of Communications and Digitalization of Ghana, to just give your reaction to what you've heard thus far, the presentation you just heard, the sense of urgency. What's on your mind as you listen to all this, Ursula? Hope you're there in your chair. We don't see you. Well, I'll tell you what. Oh, there you are.
There.
Okay, hi.
There.
Did you hear my question? I just wanted you to respond to what you've heard so far and how you feel about the urgency of this challenge and what we can do.
I missed the last bit of the presentation, and that's why I got up to see if there was a problem with my connection.
We know how that is, don't worry.
Thank you, Excellencies, and it's a privilege to be sharing this platform with such distinguished personalities to talk about a subject that is of interest to everyone and is at the heart of the work that we do. And yes, as has been indicated, without connectivity, the life as we know it, as has been exemplified by the pandemic, would come to a halt. But we can't leave everyone behind. And all of us have a role to play: governments, equipment, manufacturers, network operators, and citizens. And we can't just concentrate on the large commercial centers and leave the hard to reach, unserved, underserved areas behind. So listening to the last presentation, it's just as if he was mirroring what we were actually trying to do on the ground here in Ghana. We need all parties to work actively together to ensure that we deliver connectivity, smart devices at affordable rates to citizens everywhere, and to provide the relevant content and services that they will actually utilize. And digital skills are indispensable to that. There's absolutely no use providing this infrastructure if people don't know how to use it to the fullest. And it's in our interest because it drives growth and economic development in our various countries as well. And I think it's important that for those of us who have access to subsea cables as well, we build to our borders to enable our landlocked neighbors also to connect and utilize the capacity that would uncover for them as well. It is also absolutely critical for all of us to see how we can leverage on assets owned by the state. And I'm talking about fiber assets that state-owned agencies may hold. Break down the silos, connect those fiber assets, and utilize them as backhaul to deliver services to unserved and underserved areas. They did mention satellite connectivity as well. The cost of it was prohibitive at some stage, but I think it's come down considerably. So we need to consider a technology mix to see how we can actually extend services to the hardest to reach parts of our country. And from our own experience, working in partnership with the private sector makes it much easier because it reduces the cost. We're leveraging on our Universal Service Fund through our Investment Fund for Electronic Communications, working in partnership with network operators, and government itself is paying for the cost of extending connectivity and the infrastructure to the hardest to reach areas. And the network operators are leveraging on that network to provide services. And we think it's a win-win situation which can be replicated. We've thrown in the spectrum as government's contribution to it. Government is providing the licensing, land acquisition, the permitting, and all of that to facilitate the rollout of the infrastructure. And it's actually paying for the infrastructure. And then cost sharing as a way of maintaining and sustaining this network. And has mandated the use of UMTS technology in the 900 megahertz band on an LTU backhauling solution for our rural citizens. And we've seen a considerable uptake wherever those networks have been turned on around the country. So with shared infrastructure, which we've mandated, national roaming, which is also mandated on this network, which is being provided at lower cost. This rural telephony network delivers services below the commercial rate because of this partnership that we've engendered. We believe that that's a way to deliver services to the people at lower cost. And so looking at all the various possibilities, we can work together quite well in the classic PPP arrangement, where the partners, also the private sector partners, also contribute a bit as part of their corporate social responsibility for digital skills acquisition, literacy, and training. And so that we can have cover the full loop of all that is required to extend connectivity to those who need it most in our outlying areas and ensure that we actually leave no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Now, Joachim, we're so happy to have you here representing Vodafone. Business perspective is critical. Talk to us about what you've heard, and particularly how you think about the issue of what private sector and public sector and civil society can do to work together to drive this forward.
Thank you very much, David, and thanks for having me. And it's very easy to follow up from Honourable Minister, because I'm singing from the same script, it feels like. And just to say, I mean, that's actually quite an important change that is happening post-COVID. I think the overarching comment that has brought all of us together under Doreen's stewardship is very much around the fact that COVID has pushed our understanding of what is possible, sometimes in the most horrific ways, but sometimes in the most eye-opening ways. And we need to embrace the boldness that COVID has forced upon us. And I think Partner2Connect, it provides exactly the vehicle to do that. Now, if I had to summarize, it was very good commentary by a number of speakers, but bottom line from a private sector point of view, we are not only, even if I'm in the supply side business predominantly, and I do demand side as well, but when you look at rolling out networks, you're very much looking at the supply side constraints, and the understanding of how we bring supply and demand to stimulate and change the economic models is going to be absolutely key to get the private sector heavily involved in this. I think I would like to highlight three things that sit strongly in our calculation of any investment case. First, of course, is the policy environment. We're talking about, the way I would summarize it is, if you build railways, you have a 75-year amortization period. Building telecom equipment is anywhere between, or telecom networks, anywhere between 7 and 14 years amortization period. It is at the same time double the capital intensity of railways. So you have to think that it's almost like building a full national railway network with no time, a tenth of the time to recover the cost, but double the total amount that you have to deploy. So economically, it's incredibly dangerous to have unpredictability in the policy environment and whether it's pro-investment friendly. So concrete examples have been mentioned by many: the cost of rollout, spectrum fees, and the like. And just to say, Ghana and a number of other African countries did a fantastic job during COVID to meet the capacity needs of their citizens by issuing temporary spectrum. That was exactly to meet the needs of their citizens, and it took a lot of pressure off the networks. So there's a lot of things that needs to happen in the policy space so as to support an investment that is excruciatingly difficult to do the minute you go beyond urban centers, which is obviously what all of us will have to do. The second thing is, you can change the economics per se by doing a number of things. So first is policy to make sure the economics is right. The second is the economics itself. So operators like ourselves, our competitors, we are all prepared now to innovate around co-investment schemes that the minister referred to, or shared rural network deployments that we're doing in a number of jurisdictions in the case of Vodafone. We're looking increasingly for co-investment and co-funding opportunities with international financial institutions to sort of manage the capital intensity that is coming with significant investment into networks. The third thing that absolutely needs to be done, again referred to the minister, and again something that we are toying around a lot with, is the reality is that we have innovated the network equipment in the past. We need to have a next wave of innovation in drive down the cost of what it costs to roll out a base station. And that's where we are exploring open RAN solutions. We're exploring satellite either as a backbone or even direct to device satellite solutions. And that may very well be a fantastic backup network that we can run, or for deep rural networks. So across all policy, economic, and technological levers, we have to come together and actually assess them and try to put all levers at the same time. If I could overlay that with just very quickly 3 horizontal points that I think should guide any discussion on solving the unacceptable connectivity gaps and usage gap. First is that we do need to have a very strong pro-poor lens, and also lens on the underserved. I found it a bit, if I had to have one piece of criticism against the previous slide, it was that it wasn't highlighted the underserved, and particularly women and girls, that you need to have a gender lens onto deployment of networks, as well as on terms of identifying things that involve them into the internet economy to the extent that we don't see today. Second is on synergies. Rightly so, it was pointed out that you have an energy security synergy that can be exploited, but I would add also you have a financial inclusion synergy through mobile money, as well as a food security synergy, in the sense that you can improve the yields of smallholder farmers and improve their livelihoods through bringing connectivity. And the final thing is something that I've been pushing very hard, and it's difficult, but this platform provides an incredible opportunity to do it. We need to have a whole of a village approach. When you connect the village, you're not actually connecting the village. What you're creating is an ability for the smallholder farmers to have access to new markets. You're creating an educational platform. Reality is that suddenly the kids can go to school. You're creating an energy solution. You're creating a library. There's so many things in terms of the business casing for connecting a village that currently is dealt with in a sequential way rather than a whole of a village way. And I think that's where also governments and international institutions can be a really strong force of creating those consortia where all the different parts come together and therefore changes the business case again.
Thank you, Joachim. So let's go back to the room and we'll hear from Eleanor Sarpong of the Alliance for Affordable Internet. I believe she's there. There you are, Eleanor. Welcome.
Oh, yes, I'm right here. Yes. So, my initial reaction to when Michael and Walid were making a presentation, I was just nodding my head because it's like preaching to the choir. And so I'm also going to sing from the same hymn sheet. But it's very disheartening to see that, LDCs, the internet affordability in LDCs is quite dire. That people are paying close to 10% of their average monthly income on 1 gigabit of data. This is way above the standard of 2%. And if you think about it, this is the equivalent of how much people spend on housing in developed countries. And so there's a lot that we need to do in order to change this narrative. The other thing that also struck me in the presentation was that you see that the coverage gaps are very, very wide, and especially in rural areas. I also noticed that 4G connectivity was very, very low in LDCs. And so what it typically says is that we do not have meaningful connectivity in a lot of these regions. And if we are thinking about getting to 2030, we need to do much better. We need to collaborate more. The collaboration is not just between public sector and private sector. We need to have civil society in the room as well. And civil society can play a very crucial role. I want to mention just 3 that I think the civil society can be very useful for in amplifying the role and calling action on issues that we need to take care of. So the first is about producing evidence. I feel that civil society, we can amplify the research that we see. So this research that has been conducted by the ITU and BCG, we also doing quite similar at the Alliance for Affordable Internet and the Web Foundation. And for us to make a very persuasive argument, we need to make sure that, that the evidence we have is very grounded and that it's also focusing on the areas that we need change on. So at A4AI, for instance, we focus on affordability research. And for the first time, we focus on LDCs that show that there's a lot of work that needs to be done to ensure that LDCs are able to overcome the huge hurdles that we've already heard about in terms of connectivity, spectrum, geographies, and the like. But also beyond that, we also have been focusing on specific vulnerable communities and groups. And for example, at A4AI and Web Foundation, we conduct digital gender gap audits of low and middle income countries to assess the policy efforts and progress that they're making on national levels to close the digital gender gap. And I like Joachim's point about looking at the gender gaps, which are very, very critical. For the first time this year, we also decided to conduct a research on the cost of excluding women from the digital economy. And it was very staggering to note that governments are missing out on billions of dollars because of the digital gender gap. You know, if we're able to close this gap in the next 5 years, just before 2030, we could be able to rake in about $524 billion US. This is an opportunity for us to be able to do a very good deal of work in our various economies. So across the world, we realize that if we are going to be able to work for connecting LDCs, we can't just focus on just the holistic. We need to disaggregate the data. We need to look at how women and girls are being connected in various, in these specific countries. The second area that I think that civil society can also play a very crucial role is through convenings and collaborations. We have seen the opportunity that Partner2Connect is creating, but I also wanted to center that there's a lot of work that's already been done in this space, and we can amplify and collaborate further. So at Alliance for Affordable Internet, we've been working very closely with various governments, and I'm very happy to see Minister Esla is here because she's one of our partners in Ghana. What we believe in is that we need to localize action. It's very lovely to come to these meetings, but then you notice that around the room, there are very few people from the LDCs here because it's very expensive to be in this place fiscally. And sometimes connectivity challenges also make sure that we don't get to hear their voices. So it's important that we move from the global action to local action. We need to make sure that these coalitions that we are forming are at working also at local levels. We are collaborating with local organizations to make sure that the actions that we need to take are owned by the communities and that they can also support the efforts that we need to put in. So in a nutshell, we need to amplify research, we need to disaggregate data and make sure that research is inclusive, and we also need to localize action to ensure that communities are well represented and also have a say in the way connectivity decisions are made on their behalf.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. Now we're very happy to have with us His Excellency Mohammed Sharif, Minister of State for Environment, Climate Change and Technology of the Maldives, which is an extremely important role, one that a lot of us think about. And so we're happy to have him here for all kinds of reasons. So, Your Excellency, please, I think you are in the room.
Thank you, David. It's wonderful to be here and to actually hear about this new initiative. I think in the Maldives context, right? I think I'm the only one here representing the SIDS, the small island developing states, right? So if you look at Maldives, for example, we are around 1,000 islands or 1,100 islands. But when you put all these islands together, it still makes about 1% of the country. So sometimes we would, saying it's a small island developing state is also misleading because it's really a large ocean nation. So how do you connect people across this large ocean, right? So I think I definitely welcome this initiative here at the Maldives. We've got 100% 4G coverage of our population, but we really have an issue of affordability. Currently, the data pricing in Maldives actually is in the top 10 most expensive countries in the world. And this is not where we would love to be. We want to move from there. We are doing a number of things. Recently, during the COVID, we have introduced a new standard for broadband connectivity, which ensures that no residential internet package ever is cut. In other words, the minimum broadband connectivity to remain at 2 Mbps or 5 Mbps unlimited. Having unlimited packages is a luxury we can't afford at the moment. So we would like to see how initiatives like this would further connect us and reduce internet and data pricing to the country. So we are working actually to connect Maldives to international submarine cables, submarine cable systems, as opposed to currently we are connected to our neighbors, India and Sri Lanka, with subsea cables, but we want to go beyond that and diversify our connectivity to the internet backbone. At the same time, we are working to modernize our spectrum management. But I think the gains we have had so far, including about 70% of the population having fiber to their homes, is not enough when we talk about real meaningful connectivity, because we've got to work on quality of service and we've got to work on affordability. So really, I look forward to this initiative and to support this initiative, especially the SIDS context of actually having to be connected in a large ocean, a small island state. This is what I would like to see, how this initiative will evolve to support everyone and leave no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we can't ignore the fact that connectivity is going to help us respond to climate change and global warming. So it's very related to your work in that direct way as well. And super important discussion we've been having here. And I just so many topics that have been mentioned that could each bear an entire hour of further discussion. The great thing about these sessions, though, I think, is that they give us a huge amount to talk about in a very compressed format. So I congratulate Doreen and her team for putting that together again. And I would like to ask Doreen to join and to give us a little further summary from her point of view. So please.
Thanks, David. I think we're sort of just scratching the surface here. We could certainly go into this in much more detail, but I do want to thank everyone. I think today helped us see the scale of the problem, some of the key issues. I found the interventions just great. I think the good news is that we are singing from the same script, although trust me, I definitely can't sing. The other good news is that connecting people everywhere is a business case that's worth it. So I think that's a really important takeaway for me. And Eleanor's point, I think it was 524 billion if we close the digital gender gap. So that's really encouraging. I think, David, it's time. What I'm hearing is that it's time to move from aspiration to reality, and we have to connect the unconnected. It's an imperative. Of course, connectivity is a lever of change, what we've heard from everyone. But if we want to win that SDG race, we do need to ensure that all people, women, girls, youth, vulnerable groups have access to digital technologies. Of course, I think Eleanor's point of stressing the importance of community ownership and localized action is also really important. I think it can be done. I think we can also do better. And of course, I think partnership is key. And it was great to hear some of the examples from Ghana of the successful PPPs that are working there. Indeed, COVID has pushed us to make possible what we thought was impossible, building on Joachim's statement. I think that we can make possible affordable, universal, trusted connectivity for all. As Minister Ursula said, all of us have a role to play. So I invite you as we wrap up to join us for P2C, much more to come, and let's make it happen together. Thanks, David. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Doreen. Yes, we'll be doing additional sessions in coming months on empowering communities, building digital ecosystems, and incentivizing investments. All these elements necessarily come together. And I must say, of the many points that were raised, I really think this issue of connecting women and girls and making that a priority is one we cannot lose sight of. So thank you, everybody, for a really intense and powerful session. Don't leave yet, because we have a little video to show you before you leave. But please do join us in future sessions. And thank you, whether you're in Katowice, whether you're around the world on Zoom. Really exciting. I'm so pleased and proud to be part of this. Thank you again to Doreen and ITU for everything. So let's see that closing video and see you all again soon.
In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, ITU has redoubled its efforts to help countries rapidly expand connectivity to reach the billions of people who are still offline. Building on the outcomes of the ITU Road to Addis Digital Development Series, in coordination with the Office of the Secretary-General's Envoy on Technology, and in line with the UN Secretary-General's Roadmap for Digital Cooperation, the Partner2Connect Digital Coalition is a multi-stakeholder alliance to foster meaningful connectivity and digital transformation in the hardest to connect communities, with a focus on, but not limited to, least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states. Based on the principles of inclusion, partnership, and SDG-focused digital development, Partner2Connect will serve as a leadership platform to mobilize new resources, partnerships, and commitments across 4 focus areas: connecting people everywhere, empowering communities, building digital ecosystems, and incentivizing investments. Time is running out in this decade of action. We must join forces now and work together to extend universal access and empower the half of humanity who is still offline to make use of digital connectivity to transform lives, communities, and societies. Visit www.itu.int/partner2connect.